Death Metal Podcast Live. This is the Demos Collector Compendium on New Jersey and New York death metal demos. So we're live on Death Metal Podcast. We're going to talk about New Jersey and New York death metal demos. We're going to play very little music and we're going to do a lot of talking and showing. So it'll be a show and tell of death metal. What's up, everybody? Sorry, I don't know if I got an echo or something. I have it in my own head, though. So tonight is Death Metal Podcast. We're back after a month hiatus. Tonight I'm going to be focusing on what probably is my main forte, which is death metal from New Jersey and New York. which I was from New Jersey, so I lived just a spit away from New York for my entire early life for 30 years. So, my playground was Manhattan, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Queens, Staten Island, BC Boys, CBGBs, the Ritz, all these old school, and then even for me, living as a New Jerseyite, I had Studio One in Newark, which was close to my house, the Pipeline, which they threw hardcore shows and occasional Entomb shows. I had South Jersey, which Ripping Corpse blew up this scene with flyers, and we had the Stone Pony and Cafe Bar. Then also in Jersey we had G. Willikers, which was the mecca of early death metal stuff. We're probably going to even see some footage from G. Willikers. So how's it sound out there? Everything sound good? How's it going, everybody that's the death metal fucking podcast alumni? Appreciate everyone that tunes in, The old days? Yes, indeed. So we're going to talk about the old days probably, but I want to, there'll be a couple newer things, not much. So, I want to, I was like, that I talked about before I had gone offline in July that I'm coming back with interviews. So I've basically been working on some of those interviews, and they take longer than expected. The two people gave me massive archives of stuff, so their interviews are going to be phenomenal. As far as also, I wanted to send, this is the first episode. Hey Alexis, this is the first episode that I got to be live since my friend Jill passed away. So rest in peace to Jill. She was a good person. What do you call it? This was at the New Jersey Death Fest 2009 that I had thrown with Gutter Christ. It was the first one. So Funerist had played, actually. So rest in peace, Jill. I love you. Sorry. So I just wanted to say that because I wasn't online during the period of, when Jill passed. So rest in peace to Jill. I went to Jill's wedding. So, I was, we were pretty close, So... So tonight we're going to focus on New Jersey death metal demos. And after this music I play, I'm going to come back and show some stuff I wanted to talk about that's a little, really far out sometimes. right, from New Jersey. So that was Hatred from New Jersey. So they were from 1985. So they were definitely playing something that was like a little deeper than the thrash. And obviously before death metal, imagine, before death metal there was thrash metal. So I mean, I had to obviously evolve through thrash metal to be into death metal. And as I look through my own personal journey of death metal demos of New York and New Jersey, these demos popped out actually. This band was from my town. They were like a heavy metal thrash band. They're called Slaughterhouse. They did one record on Metal Blade that flopped. The demo was sick though. I remember I got this. This was like one of the earliest thrash tapes in my youth. And then I remember getting a couple other ones too. Astaroth, Demo 89. So early thrash stuff. And there was this band I thought was going into the thrash death metal zone. They were called Kill Power from Stony Brook, New York. So at the time, these were good demos, man. I had this one first. I remember Blood. What is it? Blood Will Bring Blood. So nobody really talks about this band. Kill Power. And then this was their other demo. I bought both of these in Mickey Music in New Jersey. So before there was death metal, there was thrash. So I figure it has to be an honorable mention to play some of the bands that influenced possibly death metal bands, or they were early on the scene. Ripping Corpse was one of them. Revenant was one of them. They were early death metal bands. There was the life-changing versions that I would put Mortician and Immolation in. Those would be, to me, the life-changing death metal demo bands. But there was definitely other bands too. There was even this band right here, Regurgitation, who did an Earache record. All right, that was Regurgitation. They later became Old Lady Drivers, so that's who put the record out on Earache. So let me turn this banner off. So basically, also, what I want to say is like some of the germination of death metal demos in New York and New Jersey would probably, be the deepest cuts when you go back to the first Immolation demo, or you go to this demo right here, where these were the things that we heard at a young age that were demos. They weren't full length records. They weren't on Earache. They weren't on Combat. They weren't on SPV. They weren't Destruction. They weren't Sodom. These were demo bands that like underground, You had it hand to hand fucking scene shit, you know? Also, Mortician, you know? Definitely, you know, hand to hand, you know, brutal, the lowest bass sounds, you know, a small band with a big fucking sound and the deep, deep vocals. Like, you know, you thought Evil Chuck was brutal, but then you saw this and you were like, whoa, what the fuck, man? And then this band put a pivotal fucking joint on fucking death metal, Suffocation. They became, you know, almost starters of a subgenre of death metal, which would probably be brutal death metal, you know? And they were definitely ripping it side by side with Mortician and Immolation and Demonacy and Human Remains and Ripping Corpse. So Suffocation demo. This is the original old school. You know, this show is going to be about tapes. So there probably will. I'll throw a couple 7-inches in the mix, but like the show is going to be about demos. New York, New Jersey ones. So I just played Regurgitation, who had a bunch of demos like Bathrooms Rule and shit. You know, sometimes I might play things out of order here too. We started the show with Demonacy. Here's a band from '87. They're called Cremation.
We have arisen from hell to bring you our cremation death from hell. Die! You shall all die as one, for cremation has risen tonight. Blood-sucking bug, you sacrificial bug, die!
So that was an early death metal band from 1987 from New Jersey. They were pretty, unknown. You know, they were Cremation. Jim Stanek was here. He'd be a happy camper. Also, I wanted to say, New York is not just, regulated or whatever it's delegated. I don't know what the word is, but just to New York City, because you had bands from upstate too. You had Immortal Terror. You had Cannibal Corpse. You had Baphomet. You had, and special shout out to a non-New Jersey band, Gorephobia, who played next to everything back in the day. So this is probably one of the earliest and amongst the earliest Necroharmonic distribution flyers. I can see the address is so old that I lived with my parents back then. So I'm probably like one of the first New Jersey death metal distributors. There was Metalcore Zine and there was a couple zines and stuff, but I don't remember anyone like distributing or selling like demos or whatever. So this was so Gorephobia played side by side with all the New Jersey and New York death metal bands a lot of times, or Connecticut or Profanatica or whatever. But the thing is, they're from Pennsylvania, and so is Symphony of Grief, so is Cerberus, So were a bunch of bands. But there was other bands from upstate New York, you know, like Grotesque Infection and shit. Which this the early stuff here. And this band would come. I got this tape actually in New Jersey when they played at the Cafe Bar with Ripping Corpse or something, Incantation. There was some kind of, you know, old school show shit, you know. There would be shows at like the Stone Pony and stuff. Torture Crypt, Human Remains, Gaffed. So this would be like atypical. This is a news like a flyer that came from the guy from Torture Crypt or whatever. So we met at like a Ripping Corpse show, and he told me about his band Torture Crypt. We exchanged addresses because there was no fucking email bullshit. And then I was on the Torture Crypt mailing list, which also I was on the Ripping Corpse mailing list, which that was like a gateway drug towards death metal shows, because the flyers that Scott Ruth would send to your house with all these band names of shit you never fucking heard of was like, so it was so influential for me as a younger person that I was like, who the fuck are these bands, you know? And then there was no MapQuest, so you would look on a physical fucking atlas or a map or something and be like, where is Red Bank, New Jersey? You know what I mean? So there's a lot going on there, you know? What's up, Mark Riddick? How's it going, my man? Grotesque Infection? Is that from Cremation LP that Ledney drew the cover for? Possibly. Yeah, possibly. I don't know. Carnal Dissection. Yeah, I have a rare Carnal Dissection, actually. This is a pretty rare, and they said it was a very unreleased or rare demo. Carnal Dissection, Disemboweled demo. So this is an old school band, too. There was a couple other flyers and things that, you know, lately I've been going through a lot of flyers and different things. And you know what? I don't want to undercredit one other band that played with a lot of death metal bands. They were right here. They're called Biohazard. Like, they would play like shows that had hardcore mixed with death metal sometimes. So Morbid Angel and Ripping Corpse would play a show with fucking Biohazard, because New York and New Jersey were close to each other. So, you know, Biohazard were trying to get their game on. And also, so, you know, they would play with anybody. And so with the death metal bands, because it was no, you know, they couldn't play bigger spots. So it was a small scene, and there was only so much room for the clubs, you know? How's it going, Goat Metal Show? Torture Crypt rules. Used to talk to the vocalists on the phone back in the day. Grotesque Infection is a great band name. Fuck yes, dude. So yeah, man, Biohazard was running right next to the death metal scene, you know? Which is cool, though. So up next, here's an early band that really, the guys, I think the guy from the guitarist from this band met Evil Chuck in like '88 or something, and then he became the Death Sound guy, but he had a death metal band too. They're called Resurrection. Here they are. Soon will not do Right, so that was Resurrection. They would play, like at Studio One, which was a club that I would go to when I was younger. They would play shows at like Revenant and like Ripping Corpse and stuff. So here's also an example of like a Biohazard show. Alexis would be proud I got this in plastic. Club Benet, it was Biohazard, Morbid Angel, Ripping Corpse, Vision Purple, and Revenant. So this was a show that I went to that the riot broke out actually, and someone got stabbed in the crowd. It was pretty phenomenal, man. Some death metal shit going on. So Biohazard, like somebody from the bouncer got stabbed, and someone else got stabbed too. Here's another old school show that went down in New Jersey with Immolation and Apparition, who became Sorrow. Hazarax, which I think had members from Jersey and Pennsylvania, and of course Scorephobia. So this was an old school fucking death metal, Frantic Annie, G. Willikers type shit, man, Sick lineup. Yeah, Club Benet. Yeah, you know Club Benet, man? And you know what, too? As far as like when it came to death metal, Incantation put a huge dent on all of death metal in the scene there, because between Seraphic Decay Records, they made a lot of suggestions for bands like Rigor Mortis New York or Darkada, Mortician. Just like a lot of Seraphic Decay East Coast shit was recommended by Incantation, who also did a 7-inch with them, which is like this or whatever. This is a repressed version now. So rest in peace, Ronnie Dio too, my boy. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot going on, as far as like death metal, history shit, So there was old school, and actually Bill Venner did the text on this, the writing shit. He did the logo too, but he wrote the text, of the band of John McEntee and Ronnie at the time, who lived in Newark. So brutal show, fuck yeah, dude. Hopefully tonight I could represent New Jersey and New York death metal. This is going to be part 1, obviously, because I don't think I set myself up for the brutal death metal rabbit hole. But I did go down into my own things that I would fuck with or listen to, or things I was closer to, Things like this. I was at this.
Suffocation!
All right, so that was Suffocation playing at G. Willikers. And rest in peace to, I saw a girl that passed away actually standing right up front there that I knew, Lisa Marie Thompson, who was back in the scene back then. How's it going, Scott? How you doing, brother? So this episode is all about NJ and New York and New Jersey death metal scene, you know? So I figure I want to talk about the demos, you know, the tapes. This is how we got our like shit around, duping tapes for each other and tape trading amongst friends, and also taping stuff for other countries. Like I was big on doing that. I would tape stuff from my scene and take it and send it to Finland. I would send it to Amorphous. I would send it to Demigod. I would send it to Spain. I would send it to, you know what I mean? Like, so if you hear a New Jersey, New York death metal influence on a band from 1992 on, you're welcome. Because I was sending tons of fucking tapes back in the day, man, to tons of people. And I mean, I noticed that Old Funeral had a demo called Incantation after I sent them a tape. So there was a lot of, there's a lot of these weird little parallels in life. They're cool though. New Jersey had an interesting and good underground death metal scene, as well as New York. And sometimes, too, there would be bands that would come out like that no one really talked about, like Decay, which is members of Incantation. And, this was like before Incantation, I believe. It was this guy, Frank and Ephraim, and then Sal Sajo, and the drummer of the Incantation demo. So they had a band called Decay. So this was there's not many of these made. I think the only reason I got this is because I bought this from someone from South Jersey on eBay. So there was really I think they just made tapes, like for a few fucking tapes, but literally, because you don't ever see this shit. There was this band too, which Craig Pillard was on this, Putrefact. So I remember going to see them too in the basement of Art. And Omar was the drummer. Cool dudes. Putrefact was amazing. Old school death metal band from Jersey. They had a 7-inch out on Afterworld Records from Michigan. The same release that did, same label that put out Profanatica stuff. Also this band too from New York. We can't overlook the New York bands. Decomposed, which Jeff Raymer from Morpheus was the singer of this band, and Randall from NYDM. This is the first demo right here. So they were a cool band too. They played shows. Look at those old RNG tapes. Remember these? This was the epitome of death metal fucking taping back in the day. These Memorex fucking Madonna looking tapes. We had a whole shitload of these, and this was probably the cheapest, but most quality tape that you could buy back years ago as like a blank tape, so the bands would even put their demos on there, because I got this from the band. Decomposed also had a live rehearsal demo, which is pretty rare, this thing. It's a live rehearsal, 91, so they were definitely an old school and cool band. And then also shout out to Decomposed and Monoxide, because you had Tito Puente Jr. Playing drums for them. And Tito even hit me up one time and told me that sometimes he watches death metal podcast on the planes. And so I guess he would probably shout out to fucking Tito Puente Jr., man. You made a fucking living off doing your thing with your family's legacy, So in the old days too, Studio One was our spot, Shout out to John Grave for copping this from me. He's going to hang this shit up. So this was a show that rolled through probably like 92-ish. Entombed played with Ripping Corpse and Incantation. They had played across the street too at the Pipeline, which was like kind of like a hardcore, like a punk club or whatever. So yeah, man. And then they had this tape. This was like just a dub tape actually. It's a band called Gomorrah. They were like it was Will Kubersky from the Teary Rots, like doom band or something. So thank you for everyone that tunes in, man. Appreciate you. I have so many flyers framed on my wall. Okay, yeah, cool, bro. How's it going, Stefan Goldberg? How's it going, We Are Spirits in the Asshole World? Hey, thank you for joining us also. You got that Putrefact demo? Cool, man. the export guy. I was exporting death metal to other fucking death metal freaks, you know? Like, it was like, you would send, I was going overboard, I have to say. Like, my tape trading shit was next level. So I wouldn't just buy the tape. I would send a tape filled with New Jersey and New York death metal, or Pennsylvania. I would send $1 or $2 instead of an IRC, because IRCs were kind of weird. Like, trying to ask a post office person, like, yo, could you sell IRCs here? And, if you saw a lot of old Euro advertisements, they said send to IRC, which equaled literally 70 cents or 55 cents or something as like a stamp for a letter. So two IRCs wouldn't possibly send a cassette across the world. But, trying to buy an IRC was like a whole different story in the United States. You still have a Gamora shirt. There was probably only one. I remember I got past that shirt too, and they said, "Hey man, here's a shirt for you." And then the guy asked me for it back later. I think his name was like Dane or something. So up next, here's a Putrefact actually from 1990, same place, G. Willikers, doing an Autopsy cover. Alright, that was Putrefact playing at G. Willikers. So back in the day, G. Willikers was like the hotbed of death metal shit, So here's an old flyer too, another one. Primeval, who were a New York band. Agoraphobia from Philly. Ex Mortis, who were a Maryland band at the time. And Fatal from Michigan had played at G. Willikers. This was kind of a pivotal gig for me because I went to this place, Streets, where they would have like thrash shows like Death and Sepultura at the time, and then Nuclear Assault and stuff. But then they had this show right here. It was Napalm Death, Immolation, and Revenant. This was the first time I ever saw Barney on stage, and first time I saw Jesse Pintado playing for Napalm Death, and also Mick Harris playing for Napalm Death. So it was like a kind of a shock showing up to the show and not seeing Lee Dorian, because that's who I had heard so much of, Scum and From Enslavement to Obliteration. Now, again, information didn't spread very well back in 1989-90. It was like word of mouth, basically, So, like, how's it going, Aaron? Yeah, everybody hit the like button. Thank you. If you like the show or make comments afterwards, more people will see the goddamn show. So you would have gone to that show. Here's another cool, too. Like, this has Resurrection in it. Resurrection, Mucky Pup, and Revenant at the China Club, which the China Club was also a cool place where they would have death metal shows. They would have them at like the China Club in Jersey, and Mucky Pup was also kind of like a band like Biohazard that would play shows next to fucking death metal bands, But we enjoyed that, it's a little crossover, you know what I mean, of the two things, So up next, I want to play one of the most classic demos of the time. One of the things that embodied all of New York death metal. I'm gonna substantiate my claim too, because here we go. Like, from your morbid friend Issa. So I used to tape, bands demos for other bands in other countries, like this band right here, Demigod. Roy Essa from Demigod, thank you for writing and sending the absolute great Incantation 7-inch. And then in the back too, he's asking me, maybe I should send you a gift too. Is this zine okay? I hope you like it, And he would tell me about like Abhorrence, Disgrace, Funebre, what Finnish bands were like, you know what I mean? And then this is the way we'd find out about bands, back in the day. So also, please, if you could support Death Metal Podcast, we have shirts for sale. Any one of these purchases goes towards paying to stream this show, because we don't have sponsors and we don't spin the Wheel of Fortune or anything. We don't have a cock block guy giving free stuff while we spin wheels or whatever. So Death Metal Podcast is not sponsored. So tonight, Death Metal Podcast is going to delve completely into New Jersey and New York death metal only. Which, it was my scene, man. It was as close as it gets. As far as like the bands that I grew up listening to, the bands that would, you know what I mean? The bands that were closest to me. The bands, I met this guy online at the Day of Death, and then years later he had a band, it was called Cattle Press. Yeah, years ago, man, like, we only spread, that was Cattle Press. Shout out to, thank you, man. Appreciate it. What do you call it? Getting your daily dose of Demigod. So years ago, like, there was, we spread things through, like, flyers and, like, little ads and shit, Ceremonium. This was an ad from Tom Pioli, I think. I found this in my collection, which this is definitely something I didn't make, so... But, my 7-inch and Necroharmonics, 7-inch. We put out a 7-inch with a band called Ceremonium, which was a Staten Island-based New York death metal band. So yeah, that's Cattle Press. Here's an old school thing too. Nice. This was the old. This was this shop that the guys from Immolation, Agoraphobia or whatever met Frantic Annie, who was Rock and Roll Plus, and she's the one that set up all the shows at the G Willikers shit back in the day, you know. So I saw someone talking about the Immolation. I guess you were talking about the old Repulse Records. They had this old demo compilation years ago where it had Rigor Mortis and it had the Immolation demos, minus the '94 demo. This too was a band. I remember my cousin Tracy gave me this. She said, "This looks like your speed." Malicious Onslaught and Primeval and Revenant. So I know it's from her because her address is on the back right there, Hickory Street. I guess she was on the mail-in list, you know. This is how you got flyers, though. They would basically be folded like this into threes, right? And then the band would put a little fucking stamp on it like this, and they would just ship the fucking thing to you, man. Tracy. shout out to Tracy from Scotland. So, you know, Death Metal Podcast, the reason I come on here, obviously, is to try to spread information, you know, regarding, you know, this scene, these demos, these shows, because this was something that I lived and was right there for. And then, you know, they see a lot of people retrospecting stuff out there that they don't really know about, or they weren't there, or I know because there was only 10 people there as fans. There was 20 people. There wasn't hundreds of people. Maybe if you went to a Studio One show with Biohazard, you know, there could be 150 people there, and, you know, you didn't know a lot of people, because some of them people were to hardcore, punk, grindcore, whatever. But then there would be some death metal fans, which was from 1989, 90, 91, 92. There was really not too many. You were either in a band or a fan, and there was literally like 40 people. You know, it took a long time for you know, things to kind of roll around, and it's cool that death metal got more popular. Hopefully, in due time, you know, we need a movie just about someone getting stabbed to you know, promote death metal, and the New York death metal scene was definitely like a nice hotbed of brutality. You know, you had all these bands like the Immolations and the Primevals and the, you know, Revenant and Immolation, and as time went on, you had Evoken, and you had, you know, the Putrefacts and the Decomposed and Morpheus Descends and Morpheus, and, you know, like it just kept going and going. Monoxide, and occasionally there'd be some thrash and hardcore in the mix, you know, where you did have a Biohazard death metal fucking show, or you had a Mucky Pup one. But for the most part, you know, the shows were underground, and G Willikers was a nice hotbed for all the underground death metal things. If anyone's interested, there's a 1 or 2 part death metal podcast dedicated just to G Willikers and its shows, so you should check that out. So Malicious Onslaught, you remember them? Cool, man. Hail Necron, brother. What's up? Necron saying hail to the chat, man. So up next, we're gonna play. This is Morpheus Descends. right, that was Morpheus Descends. That was an early 1995 appearance outside of New York. So yeah, I mean, during like the period of like 1990 to 95 was pretty pivotal for the demo era. This was a good New York, New Jersey mix right here. Sorry. Immolation. No, sorry. Incantation, Mortician, Primeval, and Apparition at G. Willikers. December 8th, I believe 1990, maybe 91. So this was, before the Apparition with Sorrow. So look at the goats on there. You got the Bathory goat. This is how things were like cut out and cut and paste back then, and then just thrown in like photocopy machines, No, I didn't play any Eternal Bleeding yet. So, also alongside of where you had bands like, your Incantations, Morticians, Immolation, Suffocation, the bands started to, put out 7 inches and stuff. But, this we're going to focus on tapes. And so there was Evoken, too, who came out, and somebody was asking what the heaviest or loudest shows were. Evoken was amongst them. And then I would say the loudest death metal show that was kind of death metal would have to be Methadrone, which was members of Womb and Craig Pillard, who played a show that physically made you sick because the subwoofer bass was so heavy and at connections that it made you sick to your stomach basically when they played. So I think that would be the segue for us to play something from Womb basically. So here's something from the 95 demo. I think this is intermixed with footage from the NJ Death Fest. All right, that was Womb. So as I mentioned before, the Methadrone show was probably the heaviest of most of the shows I had been to. I would say also, who else would be the loudest of all the death metal bands I saw? I remember I saw Suffocation super loud one time in Long Island at the Sunrise. What's up, Craig, too? Also, I saw, who was super fucking loud, man? Evoking. They broke the foundation of the club next to, the house next to where they threw a show at Hartley's. So that was kind of cool. I remember the next day they said there's a fucking, the guy came over and complained, and he broke the foundation of the fucking show, of his house or whatever. Womb and Methadrone both slay. Disciples of Mockery need repress. Yes. Here's the Disciples of Mockery too, which was, they had a demo and then they had the Prelude to Apocalypse release. So these were all, important New Jersey death metal things. This was a show from up in Buffalo, where you had a lot of New Jersey and New York death metal bands. Immortal Fate, Divination, Sacred Death from Syracuse, Mortician, Incantation, and then even Rochevore on this one. So old school fucking shit. Also, a lot of the South Jersey stuff was really banging, dude. Like, you had Torture Crypt, Nocturnal, Gaffed, Human Remains, and like I said, there was a million Ripping Corpse shows back in the day too. Nocturnal, Torture Crypt, Gaffed. This is a different show. Some of the things, this is probably chopped off at the bottom because they stole the logo from Studio One or something. Revenant and Resurrection, probably at Studio One. There was definitely like a huge scene in New Jersey and New York, whether it be South Jersey and you had G. Willikers, or you had the bars that were close to the shore line, which would be like the Cafe Bar or like Stone Pony or some of those places, Club Benet. And then you had North Jersey, which had Obsessions. You had Studio One. You had, it was kind of before the Clifton kind of like Dingbats era. But there was some stuff, like that came later there, even stuff we talk about on here. So let's see here. Will Disma be putting the Dementia be putting the Disma out? Dementia will be releasing a new Disma album. You heard it here, brother. So, okay, yeah, Lucas does a good job, definitely, man. So, up next, also, I guess we should play maybe Disma, too, since we played Womb, right? Let's see here. Like I said, I'm not playing the show in order. This is just, and I can't even cover all of New Jersey, New York death metal in one episode, because basically, there's so much of it, basically, you know what I mean? Maybe I'll save the Disma for later, but, we're trying to do this a little sequentially. Here's something that came out also in 95. This is a rehearsal from Human Remains Basement.
Lay one on.
Right, so yeah, Human Remains in the basement in '95. So Human Remains too. I remember first seeing them at G. Willikers, and they were playing a very bizarre style at the time. We were looking at them like, what the fuck are these guys doing, man? Like, playing these discordant chords and playing with their hands in different places. And it was only later as time went on when they were recorded, and then even at the shows though, like you kind of got won over because you're like, fuck, man, this is like a kind of like a next level Ripping Corpse thing going on, you know? Which was cool at the time. It was very interesting. So let's not forget our upstate counterparts, Grotesque Infection. All right, that was a Grotesque Infection. So they would come and play in New Jersey too, but they were from upstate New York. Cool dudes. Lived near like Niagara Falls, I believe. They had a scene up there too, man, in Buffalo and near Niagara Falls, and there was things going on. Like I said earlier in the days with the Immortal Terror demo, and then like the Carnal Dissection. Obviously, about Baphomet, and you know that Cannibal Corpse was a New York band originally. You know what I mean? But there was these pockets of other stuff going on, where was not New York City. But I'm trying to touch a little bit of base of everything here. Yeah, Putrid-Fest. That was a cool band too, man. They were definitely sick as fuck. Let's see what else we have here. Concurrently, also too, slightly after Suffocation, kind of were doing their thing, whether it be a Jewillikers doing their demo material. There was another demo band that came out that did a lot of stuff on Wild Rags at the time, and then they had made a pretty big buzz in the underground because the amount of flyers they spread and the amount of promotion they put behind the band. And Chris Pravelis was always a cool dude. And here's Internal Bleeding.
I'd like to see a pit, but I don't know if we'll get it, so maybe a lot of headbanging will be good. Anyway, it's called Anointed in Servitude.
right, so Death Metal Podcasts, Eternal Bleeding have to be represented amongst the demo bands because their Invocation of Evil demo was definitely like something that was hitting the underground hard, man, in 92. Cool dudes. They would play shows around, you know. Don't forget Necro Fest from upstate New York either, a super old one. But yeah, I mean, you would see old flyers with like Ripping Corpse, Revenant, Ex Mortis, Internal Bleeding. This was at Wilmer's Park, the place where they have that AC video where Seth's going crazy. But, you know, like a lot of New York bands played out in Maryland or Massachusetts or, you know, Pennsylvania. Like we had a comment here from Scott Korber. Internal Bleeding and Pyrexia used to come to Wilkes-Barre, PA a lot in 92, 93 to play with Ossuary and others. So yeah, these bands played around, you know, the area and good shows. I lived in Long Island in the early 90s, a little bit for Suffocation, Internal Bleeding, Pyrexia, Afterbirth, all good, exactly. Embryotic Death was a cool older band, you know. IB's demo cover does look the best. The Dollar demo was their first. I drew some artwork for IB back in the day. Cool, man, that's awesome, dude. Yeah, I remember seeing a lot. Your artwork was like all over so many different old school flyers here. Voracious Contempt always ruled. Love that cover. I agree about that though. After though, they always had weird covers. I think the new one is good actually, in my opinion. You know, Chris Revelis does cool layout stuff. Anyone got the Dollar demo? So yeah, Chris Revelis fucking rules, man. So up next, we're going to take it back to the unreleased Ripping Corpse 92 album. Some tracks. Check it. Right, so it was an unreleased Ripping Corpse second record, basically, from '92. Some of the tracks, there's a couple with vocals, and there's most of them are instrumentals. And now I don't think it ever really legitimately got any kind of release except for a YouTube one. But it's a full length thing. It's like 40 minutes long. So there was other death metal demo bands as time went on. You had your early era Immolation, Incantation, Suffocation, Revenant, Resurrection, our Upstate brothers, Grotesque Infection, and Immortal Terror, and the New York scene. We had Mortician, Decomposed, Morpheus Descends, Malicious Onslaught, Jersey. You had a lot going on there too. You did have your Decay, you had your Ripping Corpse, Torture Crypt, Human Remains. There was just like a litany of super good death metal bands in such a small concentrated area. But New Jersey and New York are not that big. I mean, like as far as the Buffalo, Niagara Falls, that's farther. Yeah, that's like 8 hours. But when it comes to like New York City and North Jersey, there was some pretty good concentrated like little scene. I saw you mention in that show in '91 with Entombed. I was at that show too, bro. Myself and Bill Venner from Disma, and a bunch of other friends too. My friend got his glasses knocked off his face. So earlier than that, there was a show where Mortician and Incantation played with their very first lineups. There was a place in Nyack. It was called Cheers, and they had death metal shows there. I saw the first Brutal Truth show there in 1991 with Incantation and a bunch of other cool stuff. So here's a small excerpt from that fucking open mic night. All right, so there you had an early incarnation of incantation with members of Profanatica. So you were right about Paul being on drums. So Paul Ledney was on drums there. McEntee, John McEntee, Aragon Amor, and Brett, who is on the yellow guitar there. And then an earlier incarnation there was Mortician with Matt Harshner on guitar instead of McEntee. And then you had Will, and you had Matt Sitcher, rest in peace, on drums on that. So that was the early, it was an open mic at the Cheers. So basically, Mortician and Incantation played. This was the first official show of both bands. And then in June of 1990 was the first time I actually saw Mortician, Incantation, and Snag at the 308 bar, which was definitely, like a really eye-opening experience that I had gone there with Bill Venner and a bunch of other people. So, if you go through time, through like 1995, through 92, through like 99, you had like the Deteriorate, you had other, some Pyrexia from New York. You had different, like a kind of a slowdown period, because a lot of the bands, like your Incantation, Immolation, even Mortician, with Roger joining, had they went on tours, so they left the area. So there was kind of like a little bit of a slowdown with as far as how many bands came from New Jersey. So, but then you had this upswing where you had bands like Cadaverment or Dripping or Anal Birth or Ceremonium or, later Disma. You know what I mean? So, some of these bands, there were bands that came out kind of like, a little later in the 90s or whatever. Or Cadaverment, This was, another band from my hometown, actually, along with Dripping. Or, you had doom bands, you had 13, which reminded me of a death metal band. Ceremonium, who did a doom death thing. And then, Disciples of Mockery in the late 90s. And Womb, like coming out with a lot of cool stuff. So, there was another band that really poked out pretty hard. They had put out a release as a demo, and then that became kind of like their first MIDI CD release. That was Funebrarum. Shane. Fucking so that was Funebrarum playing live with Alex Spooks on guitar there. I'm playing in Europe, I believe, at that show. So yeah, right after Funebrarum were doing their thing with that drummer, right there, Sean. Sean actually connected with Daryl Kahan and Craig Pillard and Randy and Bill Venner, and they formed Disma basically, and Funebrarum kind of just slid into the dust a little bit, So what do you call it? The Disma demo was made not too far after that, and also Matt had a band too. I found the old demo, his band too. Though he was in the Funebrarum videos, the second singer, Kevorkian. He was also in Ruin with. Also, I don't want to forget myself here. I did 2 zines back in 1997 to 1999. This one with a cover by Mike Diana, so it was a pretty scuzzy ass zine with a lot of Euro stuff and horror and disgusting demo shit. So definitely, it was called Flophouse of the Freaks. There wasn't many New Jersey zines, and there wasn't much death metal zines at all in New Jersey. There was very little. But I try to represent for my stuff. But so yeah, not too far after Funebrarum, you had the Disma demo. right, so that was the Disma demo. So, as time progressed with the Funebrarum, kind of went under the rug a little bit, and then it became more of a Disma thing. So, there was definitely also a shift towards brutal death metal demos more, so this was early, so it's just the demo New York, New Jersey thing. Here's two different rare copies of the Disma demo right here. I think the green one or the black and white one's rare. I'm not really sure, but definitely you don't see this too much, Original old school fucking demo tapes. Also pre-dripping demo I found here, retro version, Steal Your Faith. So, there was an early show with that I threw actually with dripping and Vomit Remnants, Brodekin, Morgue. This was at Connections, which was one of our death metal hangout death metal places, where they had good brutal shows, the Funebrarum release, the earliest demo actually became what became the first Beneath the Columns of Abandoned Gods. So the lineup you saw there was a different one. This had the original drummer, Brian, and it had Nick Orlando from Evoken, who was the writer of all the original Funebrarum stuff and all the early Evoken records as well. So he was the main. Yeah, I think even after he left the band, they still had riffs. So let's go and play a few more New Jersey and New York related death metal demos. So this whole death metal podcast was just, it's kind of like a holdover towards till our next, where we're going to do more interviews on Death Metal Podcast. I swore off playing music about a month ago, and I said I'm going to do all interviews, and I have one kind of partially, the photographs partially lined up in my StreamYard, but I didn't have time to speak with the interviewee to talk about when we were going to do it, I feel I have a better setup now here, in some ways, and some ways not, so... If you see me and then I'm gone, I'll be back, But I wanted to do this interim death metal podcast, and I wanted to come with a theme, and I figured, well, what would be a good theme for a death metal podcast I haven't done? And I said, New Jersey and New York death metal demos is one I don't think I've done. So we played a lot of them on here, and I'm a big fan of those. But at the same time, I don't know if I did an interview, an episode on this. So, I want to show what the death metal demo tape collector's perspective was on this, and also the showgoer of 1990 through 95 and 99 and before that, and thrash and all this stuff. Because, and I'm not trying to throw shade at any other death metal podcaster, other YouTuber or podcast or whatever. But basically, from what I'm seeing, none of them were actually at any of these shows or being involved with the scene where I was. And even in New York, a lot of the people that were involved with the death metal scene in New York are gone, And then there's a few standout remains, like Ed Farsley. And shout out to Ed and his upcoming Rage of Armageddon Fest coming this weekend. So, there's a few standout death metalers that are still kicking after all these years, man. And tape cassettes, that's what I'm saying. I wanted to go, because tape cassettes were the way. There was there was CDs, but it was not popular, and records were not popular. 7-inches were a little popular, because they were cheap, and tapes definitely were spread amongst each other to, through trading, we would dupe tapes for each other, and then you did this with people from other states, and then if I traded with Richard Santos, he would send me some Texas stuff from Homicidal Productions, Homicidal Enterprises, or and then maybe a Chupacabra demo or something, and then I might send him an incantation fucking dub of a live show, So up next, let's see what we would like to play here. I feel that this has to be a 2-part episode, because basically I can't cover all the 2000s, 2010s on, and 2025 on. So just abridging a little of this, I wanted to come on here just to play some music and enjoy, just a little commentary from you guys on what bands you liked from New Jersey and New York, or what demos were the ones that you were into. So this is from '95, Ceremonium live. Right, so there you have Ceremonium, which was a Doom death band. So it's nice to have guys from Evoken in the chat. We have guys from Disma in the chat. Mark Riddick, the artist, in the chat. So thank you guys for tuning in too, man. Appreciate it. It's cool to see the local support, So Evoken bypassed the demo tape and went straight to CD, Marebone's layout. So yeah, that was cool. And a Ripping Corpse, Splattered Remains is definitely one of the classics. You're definitely right about that. New Evoken single is damn good. Checked it out the other day. Scab Mag, Calvin, Uniforce. Yeah, these were good spreaders, Yeah, Brandon from Ceremonium in there. So yeah, thank you. Also, Vacuous Steps in the chat. Bob Kelly, Richard Santos from Texas, the good flyer collector. So thank you guys too for tuning in, man. I hope that I'm bringing at least a little light on some demos maybe that you never heard of. I don't have a complete timeline put on this, but it's pretty. I'm trying to keep it as pretty tight as I can. As close as I could get it. How about this little Dibbit? This was recorded outside of Willikers.
Okay, cool. How's your demo been selling?
All right. We put it out about 2 months ago, and it's been selling all right. Can't complain.
I'd say like 300 copies so far.
I'm hoping to do a 7-inch soon.
I don't even remember that.
Some label from Colorado wants us to do a 7-inch for it. So we're probably going to head into the studio soon for that. Put 2 tunes on there. And I'll take care of that.
How'd that show in New York go with the season?
Which one? In DC, you mean?
Can you play
New York?
New York.
Oh, the right track?
Yeah, the right
It
track.
went all right, but it was like the local radio station around us, the only one who plays like the metal scene that we play. And they had canceled it the night before. And then the next day, it was reopened and no one knew about it, so no one really showed up.
It was like,
but it was all right.
Bands, pretty much.
We had a good time.
Where are you guys from?
I'm from Long Island, Suffolk County.
Is there any place to play out there?
Yeah, Sundance, the place we played on with the Deceased, right track in. There's another club called February's in Elmine. That's about it. Not that much to play.
You gotta try to get into the Sundance.
What?
You gotta try to get into the Sundance.
We're not in there, but we're not supposed to. We don't like to work with bands that aren't signed, really. They give us a hard time. So we look forward to traveling. It's much better. Have a better time and shit.
How'd the show in DC go?
That was excellent. That was like the best show we ever played.
People were killing each other.
Yeah, it was great. We're going back there in 2 weeks. Can't wait.
Level Creation. 2?
Level Creation.
Who else?
Deceased.
That's Safari Club?
Yeah.
How many shows have you guys done so far?
About 5 or 6. We've been together
7 months.
Yeah, about 7 months. He came from Suffocation with the singer. We were in another band called Mortuary, me, the drummer, and the other guitarist. We just then we formed about 7 months ago. Our tunes matched perfect, so we got together rather quickly.
All right, a little history on Suffocation there. So that was an early interview from July of 90-ish, probably recorded outside Willikers. And then, yeah, you saw Josh Barron, who had joined Autopsy, actually, shortly after that. So that was kind of cool, just old school Suffocation. And as you see, people wearing the Revenant shirts or Morbid Angel, that was a big thing. Somebody mentioned Cerberus's demo. Here it is right here. So Cerberus actually became Symphony of Grief, which we're going to play right now. And then we're going to wrap up the show pretty soon. I got 1 or 2 more to play. And then we'll do in a different episode that's more brutal death metal oriented. But I'll throw in 1 or 2 before we end here too. So here's the Symphony of Grief. Because somebody was from New Jersey, it's Symphony of Grief. All right, so I want to shout out everybody that tunes into Death Metal Podcast. We'll be back to do more episodes. Like I said, I'm trying to push towards interviews, but we did this just to play with the sound at this locale. And so shout out to everyone that tuned in since the beginning: Zachary AK-47, Evan Williams, Crawling and Vomit, Bob Kelly, Vacuous Steps, Rich Delgado, Rotten Punks, Tactical Billy, David B, V, Joker NYC, Cropsy Maniac, We Are Spirits in the We're in the Spirit World Asshole, Nevermore Rules, thank you, Alexis Morrow, Brutal Assault, who else is here? Trivium, Zine Roel, Crazy White Boy, Baltimore representing, Daniel Nelson Rambeles, Annette, Craig Pillard, the guys from Evoken, Mark Riddick, who else is here? Smorgasbord, Defiled Grave, That Goat Metal Show, Synthetic Life, Jeff Chapman, thank you, Cheers to New Zealand, Fulna Burlor, who else here? Thank you for everybody that tunes in. Scott from PA. Stefan Goldberg. You guys have been supporting a lot of our Death Metal Podcast shows. And shout out to all the lurkers who are not chatting. People like maybe Melanie's Death Metal Podcast. Melanie Loves Death Metal, or, the Goat Metal Show. Go check those out. Go check out Carl. The Witching Hour has been very fucking busy, man. Check out that Necrovore interview. Aaron Fogg. Who else here? James G. Philosopher. This is what I meant. Annette. How's it going? Thank you. Appreciate you. Necron. Appreciate you. Tactical Billy. Thank you for everyone that tunes in, man. I have to say, a lot of cool fucking motherfuckers, So I appreciate that. Christopher, Corey Rapazzo, thank you. Richard Santos, thank you for everybody that tuned into this episode of our New York, New Jersey Death Metal Demos. I think I have to make another one because this can't cover the spectrum of all the demos. This was more like a early, as usual, the early form. Torture Crew.